Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is Susan Castonguay. She is a board member of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, the Connecticut chapter, and also a mother of a cystic fibrosis child. First of all, we want to welcome you to the show, so thank you for being here.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks a lot for having me.
A very generic question to start out for those that may not be familiar with it. What is cystic fibrosis?
Okay, so cystic fibrosis is the number one or most common life-threatening genetic disease in the United States. There are approximately 30,000 people in the United States who have this disease and about 70,000 people who have it worldwide. The simplest way to describe what this disease does to the body is we all have mucus in our bodies. We all need mucus to live. Mm-hmm. People who have cystic fibrosis have, wherever there's mucus in their body, the mucus is especially thick and sticky. So most people will ask me when I talk about cystic fibrosis, that's that lung disease, right? And I always say, yes, it does primarily affect the lungs and the digestive system, but it also impacts many other organs in the body. The ways in which it affects the other organs of the body are not typically life-threatening. But primarily it's going to affect the lungs, the digestive system, the sinuses, again, anywhere that there's mucus in your body.
It sounds like a bad head cold to start,
Yes.
And I bet you it's been misdiagnosed. Somebody may not even realize what's going on.
It has been misdiagnosed so many times, Sean, and I can't tell you how many parents I have met right here in Connecticut whose children were literally on their deathbeds and within hours of dying, and finally the diagnosis of cystic fibrosis was made. One of the problems with this disease is that when my daughter was born in 1998, she's 16 years old, at that time, Sean, there were only 2 states in the United States that had a law requiring all newborns in that state to be tested for cystic fibrosis. Now, that's pretty amazing considering that, again, it's the most common life-threatening genetic disease in the United States, and yet only 2 states had a law.
And I'm going to assume Connecticut was not one of them.
It was not. Those 2 states were Wisconsin and Colorado.
Did they just have active legislation out there that people were maybe aware of it and were kind of bending the ear of legislatures to kind of get them to get on this? Is that what?
That's what I surmise happened. Probably a very well-organized parent group, probably the cystic fibrosis chapters in those states probably moved their legislature to pass those
the
laws.
Squeaky wheel.
Exactly. But here in Connecticut, soon after my daughter was born, I, along with a lot of other parents and the Connecticut chapter of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, lobbied to get legislation passed. So fast forward, Sean, to May of 2009, and Governor Rell signed a bill passing legislation in Connecticut mandating that every child born in this state will be tested for this disease.
That's the good news.
That is the good news. But I have to tell you that when she passed that legislation, at that time, there were only 2 states left in the United States that did not have that legislation, and that was Connecticut and Texas.
Why was Connecticut so late to the party? Is it just that people weren't speaking up? There wasn't that outcry for it, I guess?
There was an outcry, but there was so much debate about how this testing would be paid for.
So it was a funding thing.
It was a funding issue. And ironically, the cost of this test is so insignificant. I think at the time my daughter was born, I think it was $35 or somewhere in that neighborhood to conduct the test. There was a lot of controversy. There was a lot of issue about who would pay. In 2009, when the March of Dimes collaborated with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, that's when they were able to push that legislation through.
Another voice, a louder voice, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. And the March of Dimes was very, very well versed in how to pass legislation for newborns, for children, for screening. They were very adept at this. So it's in great part to them that we have this legislation. And why that's so significant, Sean, is because every study has conclusively demonstrated that the younger a child is, when they're diagnosed with this disease, the greater their longevity. So there's a direct correlation there. And the reason is simply because the sooner they get diagnosed, the sooner they can begin medication and treatment, seeing the doctors, getting the right regimen, medical regimen. So that's imperative. There have been, again, in the past, many families, especially along what we call the Gold Coast here in Connecticut, Fairfield County. Most of those hospitals had elected not to do, at the time when it wasn't mandated, they had elected not to do the testing.
So they had the choice of either doing it or not doing it before it became mandated.
Correct. I gave birth to my daughter at Bristol Hospital. That was a hospital that had elected to do it. So she was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at 3 weeks of age.
Okay.
And that was instrumental with getting us, her parents, informed, educated, and getting our daughter the right treatment right on board. And the treatment is really exhaustive for patients who have cystic fibrosis.
Maybe even more so as a young child?
Well, at any age. And because it's a progressive disease, I would say as you mature with this disease, the rigors of your chest physical therapy increase, the rigors of your medication may increase. For example, right now my daughter does on a daily basis an hour and a half of chest physical therapy in the morning before school. Now, school starts for her at 7:40 in the morning.
How old is she?
She's 16, so
Okay.
she has to get up at 5:20 in the morning every day.
Wow.
7 days a week. It doesn't matter if we're on vacation. It doesn't matter where she is.
If it's a holiday, whether she has the day off or not.
It's not a holiday from cystic fibrosis.
Yeah,
this
right.
is a disease that doesn't take a break. And I don't know if I mentioned this. It's a genetic disease. So my daughter, people who are born with this were actually had this disease at the moment of conception. And there are tremendous advances that are being made today by the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. When I was born, children weren't expected to live to attend elementary school.
Wow.
This year, in 2014, 2 groundbreaking events will occur. First, median life expectancy for cystic fibrosis patients will exceed 40 years of age.
Wow.
That's huge.
Right.
That's
compared
huge.
to like, getting
Exactly.
through elementary school.
Exactly.
Wow.
In the last 30 years alone, life expectancy for CF patients has doubled. Secondly, and this is really amazing, is that today, in 2014, children, the number of patients who have cystic fibrosis in the United States, more than half of them will be over the age of 18. Now, cystic fibrosis has always been in the past known as a childhood disease because people didn't live beyond their childhood. There were no cystic fibrosis adult centers anywhere in the United States. That has been all changed and altered because of these significant advances, because life expectancy is growing and changing every year and increasing. We've had the need for the first time, adult cystic fibrosis centers.
Is that because they weren't diagnosed as part of the reason why? Can you be diagnosed later in life and find out you have cystic fibrosis?
Absolutely. In fact, I know of a woman who was not diagnosed with the disease until she was in her 30s.
Wouldn't you have symptoms all through your life?
Absolutely. You would have symptoms, but everybody's symptoms are different, Sean, and here's why. There are over 1,000 mutations to the cystic fibrosis gene.
Wow.
So you could have 1,000 CF patients in this room, and not 2 of them would have the same genetic genes for cystic fibrosis. They would all be slightly different. And what that means is that the disease is going to impact each one of them differently. For example, while one may be having significant lung issues, another may be having significant digestion problems, while another is battling severe chronic sinusitis.
Does that make it more difficult to identify initially, and also does it make it more difficult to treat when there are so many different symptoms and everybody has something different?
Well, in terms of treatment, there are two, let me just say first off that if you have cystic fibrosis, if your child has CF in Connecticut, there are two CF centers. One is at CCMC and one is at Yale. The doctors there are well versed in all of the myriad ways that CF impacts your health, and they're more than capable of treating all of them, no matter how they arise. In terms of diagnosis, life expectancy is growing, and to answer your question, there's many reasons for that.
Let's hold that thought, and we'll get to those reasons after this break. It's a fascinating topic, and we've got a lot to get to. Susan Gastegui is a board member of the Connecticut chapter of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, as well as being a parent of a child with cystic fibrosis. But let's take a break and come back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay with us. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today is Susan Gastegui. She is a board member of the Connecticut chapter of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and a mom of a child with cystic fibrosis. Right before the break, we were talking about why people are living longer with cystic fibrosis right now. So let's continue with that.
Well, I think there's not one reason, Sean. There's multiple reasons. First, as I talked about, children are getting diagnosed earlier because of this mandatory screening across the nation. And that gets children into the doctors, the CF centers, sooner, and it gets them treated, so their longevity increases. Secondly, I would have to say that one of the biggest reasons why people with cystic fibrosis are living longer is because of the incredible progress that the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation has made in terms of research. The breakthroughs are incredible. I can start with one of the biggest highlights. In 2012, in February of 2012, a new drug came onto the market, was approved by the FDA, and that drug is called Kalydeco. Now, Kalydeco is a drug, the first of its kind, because it goes and treats cystic fibrosis at the cellular level. It gets right to the basic genetic defect and corrects it.
Wow.
Corrects it. So now this drug was produced for a specific mutation
and
of the
we
CF
just
gene.
talked a little while ago about there being
Exactly. 1,000,
yeah.
approximately 1,000 mutations. Now the mutation that this drug was designed to help is present in about 4% of the cystic fibrosis population. However, the company that is producing Kalydeco, the name of the company is Vertex, and they're right out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. This drug company, as we speak, has many other drugs in the pipeline that they are working on in collaboration with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation through their funding of the CF Foundation. And many of these drugs hold extreme promise for portions of the cystic fibrosis population that have much larger than 4% of
I was going to say they'd have to make 1,000 different versions of the same
yes.
drug.
But really, these new drugs that are coming are targeting many of the mutations of the CF gene. For example, there's one mutation that at least 80% of the CF population have one copy of this gene. So the drugs that are coming are going to really focus more on larger segments of the CF population. However, I have to say that the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation is committed to finding the cure for every
right.
mutation and will not stop until every mutation has drugs that can not just treat it but cure it.
So we can say that cystic fibrosis as a disease, there could potentially be an all-out cure at some point in the future.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I believe that to be true, and I believe that it will happen within my daughter's lifetime.
Your daughter, is she one of those 4%ers, or is she one of the larger group?
She's not.
Okay.
She falls into a group. 50% of the cystic fibrosis population has 2 copies of a gene that's called delta F508. My daughter carries 2 copies of that gene, as well as 50% of the CF population. It's possible that Vertex will have a drug out on the market, hopefully by the time she graduates from high school, that again will treat the disease at the cellular, at the genetic level, correcting the basic genetic defect. And I believe that that is imminent. In fact, I believe that the cure is so close that it's
Will it be
palpable.
in your lifetime?
It will be in my lifetime.
You know, what's interesting is I know, you know, by trade you're an attorney, but you're talking like a doctor today because you know so much about it. And that's because you have a vested interest in it. When someone
Yes.
close to you in your life, in this case your daughter, a person has a tendency to glean and learn as much as they can about it and follow the research and see how close we are coming, how it's advancing, because this affects not only your daughter's life, but your life and your family's life in general.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have to tell you that when my daughter was diagnosed in January of 1998, had I in my lifetime ever heard the words cystic fibrosis? I suppose I had, but I had no idea what this disease was. The only thing I remember from the doctor telling us about this was what stuck in my mind was osis. Osis. And I knew that an osis was not a good thing.
Right.
I had no idea whether this was a musculoskeletal disorder. I really didn't know what it was. But very quickly, my husband and I dived in and tried to become as knowledgeable about this disease as possible.
It sounds like that's a very positive thing to do, to just learn as much about it and not kind of maybe emotionally take a step backwards. And because that was the question I wanted to ask you, when you found out about it initially and really didn't know that much about it, how much of a toll did it take on you, on your psyche?
Yeah, it was devastating. It was devastating.
And your husband too.
Yes. You know, this is the last thing that you ever, this is something that happens to other people. It doesn't happen to you. This is a story that you hear on television, much like members of your audience that say, it's unfortunate, but
don't have an emotional attachment
this doesn't
to it.
happen to me. But here's the thing about cystic fibrosis, Sean. It may not happen to you, but it may happen to future generations in your family, and here's why.
Is this skip a generation, that sort of a
No,
thing? No,
but I don't have cystic fibrosis. I carry the gene for cystic fibrosis. I will never have cystic fibrosis.
But you're a carrier.
But I'm a carrier, and so is my husband. Now, we're not that unique because 1 in 25 people is a carrier for this disease. Again, when I talked about the fact that cystic fibrosis, CF, is the most common life-threatening genetic disease, so if you consider 1 in 25 people is a carrier. So if you had 25 women in a room, 25 men, my husband and I got together, got married.
What are the odds? But
Yes.
there are the odds.
Exactly. Yeah. And those odds came to fruition for us because with every pregnancy that I would have a 25% chance of having a child with CF. And our first child, Caroline, has cystic fibrosis.
So there's my next question. We talked about your psyche, your emotional state of mind when you found out, and your husband's. But the child had it from day one.
Yes.
So she lived with it and really didn't know any other way of life.
Correct. But
except with all her friends.
Correct. But there were signs along the way, even in those first 3 weeks of life, that we did not know. Our daughter was not gaining weight. What I learned afterwards is that a newborn is supposed to gain between ½ an ounce to 1.5 ounces a day for the first couple weeks of life. The first 3 weeks of her life, she did not gain a single ounce.
There's a red flag.
Big red flag. And she was a failure to thrive baby. And we didn't know it. Our pediatrician was very suspicious and had us coming in on a weekly basis for the first 3 weeks to keep weighing her and kept questioning us about her feeding habits. And
knew something was up.
Knew something was up.
Yeah.
And she actually had done her residency in Ohio at one of the biggest CF centers in the country. So she thought that something was wrong from the get-go.
You know, one of the things, a kid, and we were talking off the air about this a little bit, a kid kind of, it's not cool to be talking about stuff like this, and kind of almost wanted to, not bring as much attention to it. And you are getting the word out. It's so important.
Right.
And she'll, maybe when she
Right.
gets older, she'll understand the importance of spreading the word and educating people
Right.
about this.
Right. Well, first and foremost, let me just say that my daughter is, she's a great girl, and she's bright, she's athletic, she does soccer, she is playing softball, she skis, she loves to ice skate, so
Wow,
she's
very
very
active.
active.
Yeah.
And for her, she's got this totally in perspective. Cystic fibrosis is just a small part of who and what she is.
But it doesn't define her. It doesn't control
Exactly.
her.
She's a phenomenal artist. She has many talents, but she doesn't let cystic fibrosis define who she is.
That's awesome.
And for my husband and I, one of the ways that we coped, because you asked how did we cope, for me, about 5 months post her diagnosis, I began fundraising. And I had never done fundraising in my life. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a researcher. I can't personally find the cure, but what I can do is I can raise dollars, and dollars will buy science, and science will produce the cure.
Well, one of the ways is you just being on shows like this, getting the word out. And another way is events like the Great Strides Walks.
Yes.
So let's talk about that a
Yes.
little bit before we run out of time.
Certainly. Well, again, I got involved in fundraising when our daughter was 5 months old, and I formed a team and participated in Great Strides. Great Strides is a national event. Here in Connecticut, there are 11 walk sites. Last year, we raised at those walk sites approximately $700,000 for cystic fibrosis. This year, I would love to see the Connecticut chapter raise $1 million.
There you go. Yeah.
From those 11 walk sites.
Always do it a little bit more each
Always,
year, right?
always, yes.
And people will be able to see all the events that are coming up throughout the spring and summer.
Absolutely.
And fall, by going to the website, which
Absolutely, which is www.cff.org. Again, CFF for Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And if you go to that website, that's the national website, you can from there go to the Connecticut chapter's website.
And as far as being involved with the walk, they can walk, or maybe they can be involved in some other way. Maybe something as simple as being there for moral support.
Absolutely.
Maybe some kind of financial donation.
Absolutely.
Or maybe like a volunteer in some capacity, right?
And I've had all of those. I've
Yeah.
had individuals who send me a note saying, I can't make it to the walk because of another commitment, but I want to support you and I want to support your team. And they'll give a very generous donation. I have a group of kids coming from the high school to be on the course route to make sure that the walkers know where to go, where to turn. People coming, giving moral support, people walking, people running the route. It's great. It's a great event.
So get involved if you can. You'll feel good about it, and it's for a great cause. So the website, we'll put the graphic up on the screen one more time. And another way to find information is simply do a Google search, right?
Absolutely. You can Google cystic fibrosis. You can find out more facts about this disease. And all of the research that's going on, the drugs that are in the pipeline. This is, I like to call the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation the little engine that could. Because for a disease that only impacts 30,000 people in the United States, it's often considered an orphan disease. The Cystic Fibrosis Foundation is consistently rated as the single most efficient medical charity, health charity in the United States. And that's not rated by the CF Foundation. That's by Smart Money Magazine, Newsweek. You can go through all of the financial magazines, newspapers that do rate charities, and CF comes out #1 year after year.
And you're a board member on the Connecticut chapter of that.
Yes,
too.
yes.
Susan Castonguay, board member of the Connecticut chapter of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and also a parent of a child with cystic fibrosis, and that's probably even more important, having you come on and share your story and talk about it a little bit. So
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I encourage everybody who's watching the program to get involved and to come out to one of the Great Strides walk sites in Connecticut.
We'll take one more break and come right back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay with us. So that is our show for today. You can see this show and many others on our YouTube sites. Until next time, I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Take care.